Hello and welcome back to Azure Lowlands, and this is unfortunately the last panel of the day. But it's the one I'm most excited about. This is the modern .NET development platform, and I'm joined by 4 wonderful people. We have Lou, we have Jonah, we have Gerald, and we have Martin. Thank you for joining. Let's just do a very quick round of introductions and then dive right in. So, Lou, take it away.
Okay, I will start then. Hi, I'm Luella Kremers. I'm Microsoft MVP Developer Technologies, and I was an attendee up to 2 hours ago, and I'm a panelist for the modern C# panel. So here I am, and I do web development on the .NET side, Blazor, .NET Core,
Awesome.
APIs. Yeah.
Awesome. Do you have a fun fact about yourself as well? I should have said that.
Oh, a fun fact. I love dad jokes.
Dad jokes?
Yeah.
Here's one for you. Why can't Java developers... No, I've screwed up already. Never mind. We'll come back to that. I'm leaving. Jonah.
Please don't come back to that.
To take that joke again.
No, yeah.
Yes, so hi everyone, I'm Jonah Anderson, and I traveled from Sweden to be at Azure Lowlands. I am one of the speakers for the first time here, and I spoke about minimal API in .NET as well as Azure API management. And day job, I work as a IT consultant working with development in .NET, DevOps, and Azure. So I'm in the right place to discuss about it.
Definitely.
So happy to be here.
Fun fact as well?
Oh, that's interesting. I love spending time with my dog, Labradoodle dog. And it's not a fun fact because everyone knows about it, but Lawrence is a dog, not another guy. Thanks.
Awesome.
All right. Well, my name is Gerald. I live here from the Netherlands. That's really good English. I know how to English. I trust. So I live here in the Netherlands, and I work for Microsoft as a developer on .NET MAUI, which we'll probably, hopefully, talk a little bit about more. So yeah, I've been basically here with the crew, helping out. I do give sessions as well at these type of things, but not today. I know not enough about Azure, probably. And then the fun fact, I don't know, I can do this. Is that something? Can we?
That's freaky.
That's wrong.
Yeah?
That's wrong.
Yeah,
No,
sorry.
don't do that.
So that's it. Sorry, that'll have to do.
That's the strangest fun fact we've had all day.
Well, there you have it.
And Martin.
So yeah, I'm Martin Thwaites. I go by Martin.net on Twitter. I am a observability advocate. I'm a developer advocate for a company called Honeycomb. And I talk about observability and observing production systems and understanding production systems and all the modern ways to do observability beyond sort of logging and that kind of stuff. Fun fact about me is apparently I have a family, but I've been traveling for so long that I'm not entirely sure anymore.
Oh dear.
As I was saying before, time zones are a social construct that my body has opted out of right now.
If Martin's family are watching, he still loves you. All right, let's dive right into the topic. It's a broad topic. We've got a lot of different levels of experience and also backgrounds as far as .NET goes, working with different areas of .NET. So this is going to be really interesting. Lou, you mentioned Blazor and web dev. That's definitely my background as well. I'm a .NET developer by trade, work with a .NET CMS called Umbraco, which is lovely. Go check it out. It's really good. I do web generally, and then I do a load of Azure things as well. So we can start with Blazor. Blazor's fairly cool, and it's become a mainstay, I think, recently in the .NET community. What are our thoughts on Blazor?
I like it. Yeah, I work with it, so I think it's logical that I like it. I don't really enjoy JavaScript that much, if I'm being honest here. So just being able to use C# syntax instead of JavaScript or TypeScript is a blessing. And it's also, it's fast. It has good performance, so I have nothing to complain about here, actually.
So I was bitten by Silverlight. And
Poor you.
And I kind of
Blazor is Silverlight V2, you know that.
This is what I'm saying. I'm slightly concerned about it. I'm still a little bit wary of Blazor for that exact reason. And it pains me to say this, I don't mind JavaScript. It's all right. Like, as a C# developer, someone who really likes C#, I still don't mind dabbling with JavaScript occasionally. So I'd be keen to hear the rest of the panel's thoughts on this.
No, absolutely. Like, you know, and of course, everyone loves to make fun of JavaScript for obvious reasons.
Yeah.
We should. But it's not about JavaScript, right? It can be any other language. TypeScript is already better, right? But it's not about not having to write JavaScript. It's more about staying inside of C# and the ecosystem and not having to make that mental switch to something else, because whenever you have to switch to something else, you're going to lose productivity, right? I don't do much JavaScript. So, you know, whenever I do have to do it, whenever I'm forced to, then I have to bing a couple of things, right? I have to figure out, like, hey, how should I do this thing? How should I do that thing? And then, you know, I'm losing productivity there. So if I can just stay in C#, still use NuGets, still use all the things that I'm used to, that's where the power is, and not so much not using JavaScript. I don't think that's the goal in itself, but it helps.
I mean, obviously, it's worked so well before, so we've replicated. I mean, everybody remembers web forms, and that went so well. That was C# on the front end and the back end. That went so well, didn't it?
Yeah.
So we thought we'd do it again.
I mean, again, I got stung by web forms too, so maybe I'm just
You have
bitter.
a rough life. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, I do have, yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I think that for me, the best thing that's come out of Blazor is WebAssembly. And
Yes.
the stuff that we can now do with WebAssembly, that has driven forward that innovation around running things inside of WebAssembly containers. The stuff that Steve's been doing around .NET Isolated is super, super interesting. And all of that kind of stuff is where I think Blazor has been this catalyst. I kind of feel like it was a Trojan horse into Microsoft to say, we're going to do this Blazor thing, and it's great, and it'll do all these web dev things. It's like, don't tell them about the WebAssembly. And then, you know, they've got WebAssembly in now, and like WebAssembly's kind of become this mainstay inside of .NET. And I think that's the real power of what Blazor has done.
I can see that. There's clearly been, in the past 10 to 15 years, a push of I can run .NET anywhere. Like, we're doing IoT with .NET now, which there's definitely ATMs in the UK that still run like Windows 2000, and probably .NET backends, or at least for the ATM interface, and that's fine. So .NET has been running in a lot of places for a long time, but never on like a microcontroller, all the way up to a smartphone, all the way up, like in the browser, in WebAssembly, as we said. So it's kind of an interesting innovation, perhaps.
Isn't there still nuclear submarines that are running Windows XP?
I'm sure. I'm sure.
Which that keeps me up at night.
They should have gone to the Sarah's security keynote this morning. And
Yeah, I have something to share about Blazor. One of the things I like about it is first, the Razor pages, because Razor pages allows you to embed your backend code within HTML. I think it's a really great feature. Another feature that I like is the hot reload feature.
Yes.
Like you reload it, and then you don't need to restart your app. It like you refresh the changes that you did, and then it shows in the browser.
yeah.
And I believe it's also, correct me if I'm wrong, it's also like responsive already, the Blazor, right? In terms of the web UI, like it's responsive, the Blazor one.
Yeah, but that's because it uses
Yes.
Bootstrap by
Yes.
default. But absolutely, that's something that you get absolutely for free. And coming back to your point, like, yes, we are getting like more and more .NET everywhere, which is really cool. And not just sharing the code, but you can run the exact same apps in different ways, right? You can run your Blazor app as a web application and get all the responsiveness for free. You can also run that same Blazor application wrapped in a .NET MAUI application, and you suddenly have a hybrid application which gives you all the power of that Blazor application as a web application. But you can now also access all the platform sensors, so you can get the geolocation and I don't know, the other things. You can turn the flashlight on if that's what you want. So you can get all that power. And the cool thing is that it's still the exact same application, because it's a Blazor application is a .NET application that we just happen to have for the web. We have to go through WebAssembly, but if you're running it on the device, we already have the .NET runtime running on those devices, right? So it's running as a native .NET application. That's what makes it really cool.
Is that the Blazor United? Is that the
No, so that's kind of like the downside, right? Like we have all this cool stuff, we can do all these cool combinations, but that also causes some confusion, right? And it doesn't really help that we keep calling all the things kind of the same but slightly different. So we have Blazor Hybrid, Blazor Server, Blazor WebAssembly, Blazor United. So, you know, Blazor United, to be very honest, I'm not really into it's coming in .NET 8. Everyone is going wild about it, so it's probably good. But no, the thing that I'm talking about now is Blazor Hybrid then, basically, which is then, you know, you have an actual native app, but basically is running a web app, so that's the thing that most people hate. But it's kind of good because it's not transpiling or interpreting JavaScript. It's the actual .NET application that you're running, and you can really leverage. Like the only thing web about it basically is the UI, and you can write HTML and CSS. That's the thing that you can do. So if you're a web developer, that suddenly opens up a whole new world for, you know, as a .NET developer or mobile phone developer or whatever you want to do. So,
in my personal experience, the only mind-blowing thing I've seen from Blazor, at least that's really struck something for me, has been the server side. I think it's reactivity or something, where you've effectively got JavaScript-esque reactivity in Razor views, like Razor pages, as I'd expect to see. So I can have, you know, it watch something and that just updates and kind of, yeah, re-renders stuff and things.
Just an update panel.
Right, yeah, it is. It is. Anyway, it's enough about Blazor. Blazor's here to stay. I think it divides the camp a little bit in some cases, but you don't have to use it, and that's cool.
It's just trauma. You know, like you say, it's just trauma. That's the only thing. We don't want to be caught with Silverlight, and we don't want web forms again. That's the only downside. And like you say, keep calling things the same names and all that kind of stuff. We just need more clarity. We need more confidence.
but what's the interesting thing to me, and maybe I'm missing something, like people keep looking for, like, ooh, is this going to be the next Silverlight? In my opinion, what kind of killed Silverlight is that the third parties said, we're not going to support this anymore. So we couldn't run our applications anymore. And that's not really something that can happen unless browsers are suddenly going to say, no, we're not going to support WebAssembly anymore, which is not very likely to happen. And also the same thing for like .NET MAUI, right? Like then Apple should say like, no, we're not going to allow .NET MAUI apps into our stores, which would be a little bit funny. So I don't really understand all the sure, I understand the fear of that you're, okay, ooh, this could be the next thing that's going to be killed. Yes, I mean, for Google, there's like pages where people...
There's a whole Twitter account.
Yeah, for like, oh, this thing got killed again. Yes, we are living in 2023. Things are going to be, you know, ramped up, and then it's like, it's not what we expected, and it's going to be killed. It's kind of a fact of life, and it's not fun to be bitten by it, but...
I think the Microsoft of 10 years ago that was or longer, that was building Silverlight is very different to the Microsoft of today. And there's a lot more focus now on developers. But on developer experience and documentation and keeping these platforms alive and thriving. Lou, I know that you're a recent graduate, or you're at least kind of newer in the industry, perhaps. So you're getting started with C# and .NET, and
Absolutely, yeah.
so there's a big effort by Microsoft of kind of reducing time to hello world is the sort of metric about like how many lines of code do I need to write to get a hello world application together. And in recent .NET and C# releases, we've had like global usings and like
the file scoped namespaces.
File scope namespaces, all kinds of stuff.
Awesome segue into minimal APIs.
It's almost like I've practiced. But yeah, so there's been a big focus on that and making the .NET development experience nicer. So what are our thoughts on that? Like, I'm personally not using file scope namespaces. I'm still a bit old school, and it's not the kind of thing I believe you can just introduce into a code base. Like, partially, you have to do it all or nothing. And it's probably the same with like implicit usings, where it's a setting in your CS_proj file that you can say, oh, okay, you pull in things like system, and it knows about all of those things. We're not enabling that because we have existing legacy projects. But when we're taking a new one, maybe we'll make those decisions. What are your thoughts on some of these newer features and how .NET's become, say, friendlier in recent times? I don't know who that was targeted at. Anyone?
I don't know either. I like the new features, especially the records. I love records to use that in my new projects. Like you said, doing it in already existing code bases. For example, I'm also sometimes working on .NET 2.1 projects. No, that's not going to happen. But for new projects, I always try to keep up to date. I use the newest features also just to keep my knowledge up to date and also to share it with other people so that they can work on it later for their newer hobby projects. Or yeah.
I think people look at all those new features about implicit usings and the global usings and the minimal APIs, and they think, oh, this is a replacement for my big monolithic application. And I think you had it right when you started talking about this, which is the big advantage is people newer in the community.
Yeah.
I feel that as .NET developers, if you were to look at the demographics, not human demographics, but how long they've been in the industry, that we skew to people who are 10 to 15 years plus in a .NET development world. Massively. Because if you look at boot camps and that kind of stuff, they teach them JavaScript. And the reason why they teach them JavaScript is because writing an Express app is incredibly quick.
Yeah.
Because it's 5 lines of code. And one of the big things that minimal APIs and all of those global usings give us is the ability to write an application with just one CS project file with 10 lines of code in it and a single class, a single program CS, which means that people can get to hello world really quickly and people can get to start using pardon the pun, to start using the .NET code base really quickly, because actually to install .NET and get that up and running is actually quicker than getting Node installed.
Oh, yeah.
Because, trying to use NVM and trying to work out which environment I'm going to use, and then do I use the LTS version or the not LTS version?
Waiting for
But
packages
Ubuntu
to
comes with
install.
the Node, doesn't it? And then there's a Node package in Ubuntu, but do I need NVM to do that? Whereas .NET now, and they've done a lot with installing .NET on Ubuntu and on Macs and stuff like that make it really easy, it's actually a lot quicker to get a bootstrapped .NET application up and running really, really quickly. And I think that is the reason why these things are so good. Not because it's going to make the person who's got a 400-page application with 100 APIs, it's not going to make their life easier. But it is going to make life easier for people who are just getting started. It's also going to make life easier for people who are writing nano services, microservices, the ones that have got 5 or 6 APIs. I don't need so much ceremony anymore.
Yeah.
That's who it's aimed at. And the people who are detractors of this are the people who think it's a replacement for my 400 controllers and 5 different areas and my big monolithic application.
Yeah. Jonah, you did a
Yes.
talk about minimal APIs
Yeah, I
today.
did. So I was like nodding all the time when you shared about it. So I spoke about minimal APIs, and I exactly agree with you that the advantage of it is that it's very ideal for beginners in .NET. For example, in the normal web API with controllers, you write lots of code. But with minimal API, you can literally say hello world and learn to build that app in just 4 lines of code.
Yeah.
And a lot of features, like, for example, the advantage of using it for microservices and like writing less of code, of course.
It's interesting, though, because there was a case maybe 6 months or so ago when minimal APIs properly launched, and they launched all the Learn docs around minimal APIs. That looked awesome. And someone on Twitter pointed out that for the new, I think it was the rate limiting feature that came in .NET 7 or 6, not sure. But they pointed out that all of the examples were, here's how you use it with minimal APIs, or here's how you use it with like Razor pages. And MVC had been forgotten. It's like, but MVC is still very much a thing, and it's still used everywhere. And so Microsoft, I guess, in producing this documentation, had gone almost too far in forgetting about some of the tried and tested, you could call them legacy, but I don't think they're legacy, ways of building applications, and are only focusing on the new. So you do risk alienating some of that existing community with these new features too. But and they're the people who may be building the 400-page type applications, big APIs.
It's different architectures.
Yeah.
It's different ways of architecting an application. And there becomes a particular point when you're writing an application where you might need to change how you structure it. Would I keep, when I write my endpoints in my single program.cs, when I get to maybe 8, 9, 10 endpoints, I'm going to start thinking about, well, maybe I want to delegate these handlers now.
Yeah.
Maybe I want to use groups. Maybe I want to, well, now I'm getting to this stage where now actually controllers would make sense.
Yes.
It's all about those changing gears, that idea of, right, I'm running fast like this, and then I'm doing this, and then I'm doing this. They're all just different facets of the same thing.
It's the point where you decide to use mediator, right?
Yeah.
I'm off.
Yeah, it always depends on the use case. Like on my talk, I said I'm a consultant. It always depends on the problem that you're trying to solve. Because I did highlight also that minimal API is good, especially if you're like, of course, microservices, and if you're doing proof of concept with APIs, and prototype is very ideal. But the more you like build it more, it will be like more complex. So you need to think about, am I really, do I really need to use minimal APIs? Maybe I need to choose something else, like with controllers. Yes, exactly.
Yeah, but that's also like what you
Yes.
led with, right? Like, if this new thing comes out, it's not like you should implement all this stuff, right? Like I am out on these events for a long time, and people always come up to me like, what is the right way? What should I do, right? What's the best way? There is no best way, right? It's always, it depends. That's kind of like our mantra, right?
It's not Highlander.
Yeah. But you know, it's not that you have to rush into this new thing, especially if you have this existing code base and suddenly you're going to mix all these things and get rid of all the namespace stuff and blah blah. You definitely shouldn't do that. But these options are here now. Like the C# language is backwards compatible to forever. So, you know, that's probably going to stay that way. So if you like the new things for a new project that you're going to build, fine, amazing. Try it out, see if it's for you. If not, keep doing it the old way. That's fine too. But I think this whole push is because of those web developers and coming from JavaScript and making it easier to start all this stuff, because we've just gotten so much used to all the ceremony with like namespaces, like, oh yeah, that's just there, right? It's just a fact
what
of life.
happens. Yeah.
But it doesn't have to be that way, and that's what we're more and more discovering.
The funny thing that I've realized recently is, so I'm as a .NET developer, I use Visual Studio, full-fat Visual Studio on Windows. I also use VS for Mac when I'm doing like mobile app development. And I tried to write C# in VS Code with no plugins installed. And it's horrible. The experience is horrible. You don't realize just how much you lean on the IDE, auto-completing and filling things in for you, giving you that namespace, importing your usings, etc.
But now we have C#
I know, now we have C# dev kit, but...
I have been writing as my primary IDE VS Code with WSL2 on Ubuntu using remote SSH development for the last 4 years. OmniSharp, all of the stuff in the background. I don't have problems. I don't understand why people have problems.
So with OmniSharp, sure, that's fine, but try it without OmniSharp. Is my point. Like,
why would I?
Well, why would you? Is exactly that. But
that's like saying I write it in Notepad. It's like I use Visual Studio, but I just use it as I write everything as a .txt file and then convert it to .cs later. You know, you use the things that are there. VS Code is a text editor, but it has a text editor with plugins, and the plugins are what make it is. C# Dev Kit is a new one.
Yeah.
You couple VS Code with Copilot and Copilot Chat, and all of those features, and I mean all the boilerplate stuff now is just amazing. It just gets rid of it. I mean, it gets stuff wrong a lot. It's just like a really good IT consultancy. You know, it says plausible lies. It's a really good tool, and it helps me in my development. I can use VS Code.
Yeah.
I don't use Visual Studio. I know it's got a lot faster recently.
64-bit now. It was 32-bit for the longest time.
I mean, I've used it since it was 64, right?
Still
but yeah, it's come a long way. But
Yeah.
VS Code, I like it because it's fast. I like to be able to spin up something really quickly, be able to use it really quickly, integration with code spaces, and all of those things are just really, really nice things that just make the whole experience a lot better.
I'm certainly using it for, like, when I'm doing mixed language development, let's say, doing some JavaScript and HTML and a bit of C# as well. It makes total sense, but I'm not doing it for pure .NET. We're speaking a lot about tools here and tooling. Maybe we can just quickly do around the panel. What tools? Anyone here using Rider? If they were, they probably already mentioned it.
What?
Really?
Me?
Get off our panel.
You're using Rider?
Yeah, I'm actually part of the JetBrains content creation program, so I
Amazing.
kind of have to boost the Rider.
Yeah,
you
of
know?
course.
So yeah, I love using Rider.
Yeah, it's got a growing fan base, hasn't it?
Yes, and it also now has some AI support built in straight into it since 2 days ago. So
cool.
it's really cool. I also think the code refactoring is better than Visual Studio personally.
I mean, everyone has been using like ReSharper in
ReSharper.
Visual Studio since forever as well.
Yeah,
right?
but
So-
I've
I-
always had the issue with Visual Studio plus ReSharp that it slows
It's
down
so slow.
Yeah.
It is so slow.
extremely. So I would rather use Rider, and also as well that it's multi-platform, that I can use to my MacBook as well as my Windows.
That is so.
And if I have to switch to Java or PHP, that I can
Yeah.
just install the other IDE or just use Rider.
That
flat
is
out.
so true. Like as I say, I'm using Visual Studio full fat on Windows for most of my day-to-day development work, but I run a Mac, and so I'm doing that inside a virtual machine, which is then a bit clunky. And then when I'm doing mobile dev, I'm doing that in Visual Studio on my Mac, via Visual Studio for Mac on the Mac, and then I'm using VS Code on the Mac, and it's 3 completely different, jarring experiences. So having one consistent UI and one consistent experience, there's a lot to be said for that.
Yeah.
Rider's new UI is really good.
Yeah.
They've just brought out that new minimal UI thing that's very mimics VS Code,
Okay.
which is really nice. The older one was very busy, and I like the new minimal one that they brought out. Not quite enough to switch just yet, but it is very nice.
Oh, good.
For my side, I actually use both VS Code and Visual Studio, depending on what I'm coding for, because I do back-end development as well for the web, for the services that we have in my project. So I use Visual Studio for that because that's what we use as a standard tool. But then if I use, for example, because I code infrastructure as code as well. So if I code Terraform, then Visual Studio is a perfect tool for me to use because of the plugins and other great tools that it has for scripting.
Eric, who we had on earlier, said, if you'd asked me 10 years ago, would I have Visual Studio installed on my machine, he'd say, never in a million years. But yeah, for infrastructure as code, like these IDEs are doing so much more now than just .NET or just
Yeah.
like they've got much better support. So it's interesting to see the broad difference. I think that's quite representative of the .NET community in general, that we've got that. But again, we've got choice, which 10 years ago we didn't really have choice. So it's good to see that the community's
Yes.
moved in that direction.
I can imagine a question for her, like how does it feel for you, like having all these great things of modern technologies in front of you? What's your strategy to choose the right one? I'm just curious because I used to be a student as well. It
Yeah.
wasn't easy, but I'm curious how it is for you these days.
It's a challenge. I'm going to be honest here. I'm being influenced by my university to use certain things as well as I'm going to conferences and I see stuff online. So it's very just nitpicking what I actually am interested in. And also just thinking, okay, would I or would I not use this in a professional setting? But being 100% sure on what I'm learning is actually usable in 1 year, 2 years, 5 years, that's of course not doable.
Yes. Learn by doing.
Yeah.
Yes,
The
for
more
sure.
you just like solve
Yeah.
problems, then you just
Just try out
do.
different technologies. If you see something at a conference that you really like or online, just start up Visual Studio Code, Visual Studio or Rider and get
Yes.
coding. Yeah.
Are you going to do that tonight? When you
Not
get home?
tonight, maybe
Just kidding.
another time.
I have encouraged my team to actually just try out different IDs and decide what they prefer, because it's a preference thing. I was going to segue onto it being quite an exciting time in the .NET community, and therefore .NET and C# specifically are being picked up again finally in education. So there are courses now in universities that are teaching C#, and if you look back 20 years it was VB, and finally we've moved on from that, and for a while they maybe have gone via Java, gone via Python, but we're back to C# in a lot of cases. And I think that's largely down to, we said before, the number of ways you can now run .NET. You can run it in so many other contexts. I think Unity has quite a lot to thank for that, because people went, I want to build games. Oh, I can use C# to do that. That's kind of cool. but also now we've got mobile apps with Maui, and people can, even with like Xamarin before, could create Apple Watch apps and all kinds of stuff. So Gerald, I know that's your area. What's the state of mobile development?
It's amazing. It's amazing. Everyone should do it. Using Visual Studio and Windows and Bing and all these. No, absolutely. So before we had Xamarin, and now, to say it's just a rebrand is definitely not doing it justice, because it's much more than that. But we try to keep all the API. The outside APIs are mostly the same, but on the inside, basically everything has changed. And now we're like a first-class citizen in .NET, so we're a real .NET product. And it's kind of funny because before Xamarin was a separate company, if you go way back when, and they started out with this idea of like, hey, we want to build mobile apps based on C# and .NET, so you don't have to write the same app 3 times in different languages for each mobile device, or each OS at least. And that picked up and picked up so much that Microsoft was like, okay, this is interesting technology. It would be a shame if something happened to this. So we're going to take it. So we did, but for the longest time, I've been working at Microsoft now for 4 years, and I've been working with Xamarin, so building apps before that, and then I got active in the community, and I got hired to work on Xamarin, so that was pretty cool. But for the longest time, it was kind of like a side project, right? And now that we are suddenly like a .NET product, we are no longer the framework to build cross-platform apps based on C# and .NET, but we are this new UI framework for Microsoft that happens to be also cross-platform. And we can see like a whole new audience coming in and seeing this for the first time, not knowing about all the history, and they're like, wow, this is amazing, and this is already so complete. Like, yeah, we're already building this for 10 years, right?
Yeah.
So, there's a lot going on. There's a lot of new stuff to discover, new ways to do things. But yeah, it's exciting.
And of course, there's competition. We have Flutter,
absolutely.
and we've even way back we had Apache Cordova, which was like an Angular JS based.
I think that's
weird.
dead mostly.
Yeah, it's thankfully.
Avalonia?
Yeah.
Apollonia.
Yeah.
Exactly.
React
What's the other one? Uno.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, we've had these sorts of concepts for a long time, and I think people have come to expect that from a language, and so having that choice in .NET in C# specifically is great. Now
I have something to add. When Maui came out, I did actually try to test it right away, because when I was learning programming, I had to learn Java as well. So I can do .NET and Java, but I ended up in .NET because I love .NET. But when I was learning Java, one of the things that I thought was fun was mobile development with Java, and I had to use Android Studio. And then it was fun to do like UI and backend programming in that. But then when Maui came, the cross-platform feature of it, I said, oh, I wish that Maui was there when I was like learning my first mobile development. So I truly believe that it's powerful, that it's cross-platform. I don't need to think that, hey, I'm gonna target for Android, then I need to learn this. It's really amazing.
But I don't think, look, the problem we have is that we want to make it super easy, obviously, but it's super hard what I do. No, but it's like, it's not as simple as saying like, hey, we have C# and .NET, and now we can write mobile apps, right? Like, what we're trying to do is kind of like also unite tools like Xcode, Objective-C, Android Studio, Android SDK stuff. That's not built necessarily to work together with what we are trying to do, right? And it's not like I think Google and Apple are actively trying to block us, but they're also not necessarily cooperating with us, right? So we don't get a heads up like, hey, there's these and these breaking changes coming into iOS APIs, watch out. So there's all these interesting challenges that are kind of unique within the .NET ecosystem that we have to deal with. I'll be honest, that happens to sometimes eat into the stability of things, unfortunately. And I understand that from a customer perspective, you're like, yeah, that shouldn't bother me, right? I just want to use the stuff. It should be easy. It should be stable. Totally understandable. Unfortunately, that's not always the reality. We're on top of things, and we're trying to fix things as we go. But yeah, I still think from a technical perspective and what you can do, that a lot of people are really happy, and we enable them to build great stuff, and now you're going to come in and ruin my day.
Well, I was just going to ask, if this all iOS thing's a problem, have you thought of pitching Microsoft building its own phone OS?
Moving on.
But no, my question was, you've been there 4 years in this kind of space. How many different frameworks, merges, splits, bringing things into there? How many? Because there is a perception at the moment in outside of Microsoft, and I get this from the observability side with OpenTelemetry and that kind of stuff, that there's always breaking changes. Everything's always changing. You can't trust these things because we're going to tell you need to do something new next year. Like, you've been there for 4 years. How many times has that happened?
To be honest, the Xamarin stuff, so Xamarin Forms was what I was working on specifically, that is still pretty backwards compatible. We've always very much made sure that we didn't do any breaking changes there. Now we have a little bit more wiggle room also because, with the major new .NET version, so we're kind of tied in with like .NET 7, .NET 8 that comes out every November. Because, backwards compatibility is cool, is important, but it also holds you back to, do new stuff, right? Like, you're going to add things, you're going to add patches, you're going to do things that are not optimal just to stay backwards compatible. Sometimes you just have to go through it, make breaking changes, no fun, but it's for the better, right? And in terms of like new frameworks, yes, I totally understand where your question is coming from. I think it comes back to also like the 4 different Blazor versions that we have right now. I don't have a good answer to that, to be honest. Like, I know .NET MAUI is going to be here. We're promoting that big time for like the mobile space, but it's not just mobile, just to be clear. It's also for like I said, what I began with basically, like it's a new UI framework from Microsoft that happens to be cross-platform, and because we are now a first-class .NET citizen, that means that we also automatically kind of have to support desktop more, right? Like, we also have to support Windows development, which is obviously important to us. So we also do Windows, we also do Mac OS, but the mobile things have been more primary historically with Xamarin. But yeah, I think there we have been pretty stable, like, iOS, Android, with what we've been building. We have taken on the Blazor side now.
Yeah, I mean, we're here to talk about modern .NET, and I think the problem with modern .NET is, well, it's not the same as it was last year, and that's a perpetually consistent problem. That modern .NET this year is different to modern .NET last year and modern .NET the year before, and it's becoming really hard to keep up with it. And I can understand why some of the people who've been doing .NET for years and years and years.
If you just look at the desktop, we have WinForms, which was gone, now it's back. We have WPF, which is, I don't know where it is exactly. WinUI? What was the UWP? Yeah, UWP. So I totally understand where it's coming from, but this is above my pay grade.
But but it's all about perception, and this is the thing I come across quite a lot when people start talking about what should I use. My space around observability is not immune to it at all. Like, people are talking about, well, what should I be using? What should I be using? And unfortunately, it keeps changing.
Yes,
and that's the problem with modern .NET, is it keeps changing in order to stay modern. There isn't we'll be done by 2024. It's fine. .NET 9, we're finishing. .NET 9 will be the last release of .NET. It's not going to happen. It's always going to be changing.
But not that it makes it better, but how do other ecosystems do that? Like, for JavaScript, while we were talking here, like 20 new frameworks came out.
Oh yeah, well, this is the reason why you can't do a degree in JavaScript, because no framework lasts longer than a 3-year degree.
Exactly. So again, it doesn't make it better for our story, but it's not like we're the only ones doing it, right?
Yes.
So
I feel like the pace that .NET's moved at in recent years has been it's been a blessing. It's good. But it's also fairly predictable. We have a yearly release. It comes in November. We know that. When you compare that to, say, some other languages like Java does a twice annual release, and the past few years, they've been playing catch-up a lot with C#, bringing a lot of features over. And I know there's going to be this, if we had Java people here, there'd be a big battle of like, you've stolen all of these things from C#. Yeah, sure. People copy features, or they make some better thing. Java had equivalent of records for years before that, and that's fine.
.NET is the Vikings of the language community.
Right.
We go and we pillage around the industry. We take all the things, bring them back home and use them.
But ultimately, it's not about putting something in because some other language has it. It's being added when it makes sense for the ecosystem, for the community. So the improvements to tooling, especially around like VS Code, comes from the fact that they want to get more developers involved in the ecosystem, make it easier to get on board, and then ideally use Azure, of course. Very few of these other language creators have that total ecosystem that they want to get people involved in. Like AWS does not have its own language or its own platform to build apps. Well, they kind of had the Alexa thing for a while, but whatever happened there. And Google, again, same. They don't really have a compelling cloud product. Can I say that? Don't really have a compelling cloud product and the languages to go alongside it. They've got Go and Kubernetes, but it's more niche. So I think .NET's in quite a unique position in that regard, and maybe the pace of change is what's keeping it that way.
Yeah.
I think it's all to do with the fact that we had stability and no change
For so
long. And as I said before, if you look at the demographics of how long people who are currently coding in .NET have been in .NET, those people were not used to the pace of change. You look at the Java community, it's always been that same similar pace. It's gradually increasing in how they're changing things. So they're not feeling it. It's like the frog in water thing. You know, you put it in hot water, it jumps out, but you gradually raise the temperature, and it doesn't. It's that same idea. We're rapidly changing the way that what people perceive as modern .NET. And if you say that this is modern .NET, essentially you're saying that everything else is legacy. And basically what you're doing is you're telling these people who've been doing this for 15, 20 years, what you're doing is legacy. And that's not great. What we're telling you is that what we're doing now is incrementally better than what you had. It's not replacing it, like we were saying before. You can still do these things the other ways. This isn't modern. It's a different way of doing it that has specific use cases where it is much better and has much better goals.
Absolutely, and I also think if we're talking about attracting new developers, because we need new developers, otherwise the .NET will die out eventually, I believe, at least. For them it's very exciting that .NET keeps renewing itself and that we get more modern features and new stuff every year, because if we look at PHP, for example, people get the idea that it's standing still. It's not standing still, absolutely not. But people that are just started think that it's standing still, so they won't even get into it. So I think having those new features every single year to get the hype going, at least for the new developers, is a very good and positive thing.
It might have been someone trolling, but there was something on Twitter recently where someone was saying, why would you use .NET? It's closed source, it only runs on Windows. It's like, well, hang on. That might be the perception.
But that's the thing. We have a big image problem still, and it's so hard to get rid of. There is so many people who still believe those things. There's blog posts full of people writing those things with just plain things that are not true. Are they trolling? I don't know. But there's still, it only runs on Windows. Like, how many years can we run on Linux and other stuff now? I mean,
it runs better on Linux. that's the thing that people don't say. Like, if you're talking sort of .NET 5 and .NET 6, they run better and faster on Linux than they do on Windows in a lot of scenarios.
As you mentioned, it's bundled with Ubuntu now. So, of course, it works.
Yeah,
Windows ships a Linux subsystem.
And that's
the year of
absolutely
Linux.
true, though, because I have quite a lot of followers on Twitter, and whenever I post about C# or .NET and why I use it, why I like it, there's always somebody that has to comment, but .NET only works on Windows and it's closed source.
It's
I
slow.
don't want to use
We
it,
need to
even though,
educate
we have been.
all the things. And if they want to really put the icing on the cake, it's like they write M and then the $S. Like, then you know, those are the true haters.
Yes, I have something to add to the C# modern .NET. It's very good point of view that you have, because I work in a modern project in my consulting job, and we do use .NET, of course, but then we do also have the infrastructure as code. And then every time, like a few months ago, we recently updated our apps and code to .NET 7, and we're just almost done with it. And then we heard that .NET 8 is coming and a new thing, so I think it's very important that everyone collaborates and get in sync in terms of the dev team, the DevOps team, infra or platform engineering teams. And it is also important the mindset that, hey, we're not legacy, we're continually improving this, we're moving there because we want to improve the system. So it's about team dynamics along with technology, accelerating and continually growing. Yes, I think so.
I absolutely hate this idea that we have to move to .NET.
Yeah.
We have to use these new things. Well, yes, that was true when we were going from framework through to core. Yes, you needed to change things. There was a lot that needed to change, and especially when everything up to about 3.1, you know, like when we go from .NET 1, .NET 1.1, .NET 2, 2.1, 2.22, and then up to 3.1, there were always like really big changes. And yes, you needed to stay up to date with it. Once we got into .NET 6, that's stabilized. You can use the same code on .NET 8. You know, there's not really any changes that you need to make in order to make it work in .NET.
Yeah, but that's the interesting thing, right? Like we've heard like the other signals as well from like, hey, the cadence and whatnot. Like, hey, we're doing a new .NET release, and then we have like the intern, which is really confusing. I think the even .NET numbers, but they are released in odd years. Which still bugs me. But anyway. So
I didn't notice that, but now that is going to play on my mind. Thank you for that.
No worries. That's what I'm here for. So, but, you know, and if you want to stay on the LTS or the long-term support version, then you want to take the even numbers, right? So you have like the 2-year window. But we get signals like it's going too fast, right? We have to update too much. We have this 1 year where we have to update and then we're done, and then the next one is already there. But the other thing is like if you do keep up with the new versions, which shouldn't be too hard, then you have to update only small things, right? And if you're going from .NET 6 to .NET 10 in the future, then you have to do this big update, and then you're going to spend a lot of time to actually implement it, maybe depending on the changes that are there. But if you do it like every year, it shouldn't be that much effort.
I know a number of engineers from Just Eat or Takeaway.com or whatever it's called over here, but they regularly post, okay, new release candidate or preview of .NET, latest .NET's out. I've gone and the service that I'm working on, I've just redeployed it on that, and I'm going to monitor it for a little while. And they say, oh, look, it's reduced my memory by 10%, and I've not changed a single line of code. So there is benefits for doing it, and maybe it pays to be at the bleeding edge, but also maybe you have some of those challenges and problems. We're doing a bunch of migrations right now of legacy, not legacy, but .NET 4.5, like .NET Framework 4.5.
No, that is legacy. Like,
I
full
was
framework can be legacy. I'll give you that.
It's still
legacy.
4.7 still supported. So
Yeah.
.NET Framework stuff up to latest .NET Core or .NET as it's now known, and it's a big difference without really changing any code. Like I can bring an API controller that I've created in MVC and .NET Framework over it. It kind of just works the same, and I have to change a couple things, but it's twice as fast. And I've not really done any hard work to get there, which is good. So it's not like writing a totally different language. And I also think for someone who's been involved with .NET, modern .NET for a while, as soon as you've got to grips with those concepts, actually, it's fairly easy to map over older code and migrate that and take the benefits of the newer platform. Microsoft's done a load of work around tooling and documentation to improve that experience as well. So I think it's a good time to be moving applications onto the latest frameworks.
Yes, that's right. Speaking of legacy, I know we have not much time, but speaking of legacy applications, I was actually involved in a development project where I had to refactor or try to migrate, this was a long time ago, for .NET 4.6 legacy applications, undocumented, and try to move it to the cloud. So I tried the try and fail different kind of things in refactoring, and to make the long story short, what worked then at that time is to, code the entire application as new in .NET Core at that time. This was before .NET 6, and that was the one that worked in Azure those several years ago. And now, today, there are different .NET migration tooling tools that literally convert those versions into compatible versions that works with Azure or the cloud.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and if you compare, let's say, working in .NET Framework previously with, I'm going to try and containerize my app, and you'd end up with a 10 gigabyte plus container because you were having to ship basically Windows core with it as well. It was huge. And then now I can have a container that's a few hundred meg because and I can run it on Linux because all of that improvement that's been put into making that modern environment just really nice to work with.
But you don't have to.
But you
That's
don't
the
have
thing.
to.
You don't have to.
Yeah.
If you want to, you can opt into these things. You can still run it inside of App Service. You can run it on Windows machine, inside of IIS. All of these things still work.
Yeah.
And I think, yes, there is people should be moving off 4.5. They should be moving off full framework. But it's not a bad thing if you are still on .NET 6 and you don't want to upgrade to 8. You don't want to use minimal APIs. You don't want to use all of the global usings and all that. That's fine.
We've got
If it
choice.
works for your application, you should be moving up through the LTS versions, 100%, but that shouldn't be a burden for you. Get on to the latest in terms of latest LTS, and then it shouldn't be. Move to the LTSs every 2 years. You don't need to move up every year. I never advocate people moving to the non-LTS releases. Always remain on the LTS if you've got a production application, and just keep doing it. It's only 2 years.
Yeah, and then you also have to think about the development team because you need to cope up with the delivery to the business, right? The tasks that they need to deliver. And it's like finding the balance that what works for the entire team, that we find the balance that it works.
I think that's a lovely message to end on. So you can choose what you want to use, find what works for you. There's choice, which is a good thing, and the .NET ecosystem maybe is moving quickly, but that's also probably a good thing. We're attracting new talent as a result and keeping things exciting, but you don't have to use the exciting things if you don't want to.
Unless you're using 4.7.
Yeah.
And in which case, stop using 4.7.
Definitely.
Stop ruining his beautiful work.
Not our choice. Anyway, thank you to all of my lovely guests, and that was the end of the last panel of Azure
Thank you.
Lowlands 2023. We'll be back in a moment. Thanks.
Thanks.